sometimes psychedelics, sometimes mushrooms can amplify feelings that don't feel good, right? They are non-specific amplifiers. And so that is why I think having someone to guide you is really important if you want to do deep work. But just know that if you set out and set an intention of having more peace, having more calm, there is a it's like a little joke. I almost want to say 100% chance you're going to get more triggered before you get there.
This is By Joyan Season 2. I'm your host, Joyan Chan, and every Wednesday we bring you inspiring stories, powerful message, and fun conversations with me and my special guests and friends, and it's my personal mission to empower you to live and lead a life with joy. This podcast is for you if you're looking for more joy, courage, passion, and purpose in your life. Now let's dive into today's episode and get ready to laugh, learn, and live your life to the fullest. Joining us today is a somatic coach, psychedelic microdosing guide, breathwork and meditation teacher, and menstrual cycle educator. She helps midlife women embrace their bodies, sex, and psychedelics so they can overcome the wounds of unworthiness, get free from mental health challenges, and build a life they are excited about. She believes somatic practices like breathwork, along with sacred earth medicines, have the power to bring us home to ourselves, awaken our authenticity, and heal the trauma locked within our subconscious. And she's here today to empower you to overcome wounds of unworthiness and reawaken your joy. So, ladies and gentlemen, tell me welcoming the one and only Leslie Draffin. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
All right, so I know the one question that I cannot ask. So, the other question is, how did you get into the work that you are doing today?
Yeah, so I really found this work from my own deep struggles. I spent about 15 years as a television news anchor before becoming all of the things you just so lovingly said: a somatic coach for women, a psychedelic microdosing guide. And it was because of the 20 years I spent really numbing out and punishing myself through things like eating disorders and alcohol abuse that I uncovered this real deep wound of unworthiness that I had locked within my subconscious. And for me, it felt like I did not deserve love. And this was something that I really had been struggling with my entire life. But what made it so much worse was when I was 18. Right after my first sexual experience, I was diagnosed with herpes, like the stigma of all stigmas when it comes to sexual STDs. And my father is a preacher, a minister in the very conservative part of the United States. So this created a shame spiral that I just sank into. And so over time, I felt dirtier and more unlovable. And what did I do? I got addicted to trying to prove to everyone how good I was, how worthy I was. So I overgave and I overachieved. And it ended up, really working for me when it came to my career. But I tied my entire self worth, my entire inner image and like authority into this job that I had. And yeah, I was making six figures by the end of it. And by society's standards, I looked like I had it all. But deep inside, I was still struggling. I was drinking every day. I was starving myself. And so around the age of 30, I tried to get help. I went to therapy. I was prescribed medications. I had a spiritual awakening and spent thousands going down that path. But for me, what finally began to integrate the healing and open the door to my big aha was psychedelic microdosing. So taking little tiny amounts of mushrooms and pairing that with reconnecting to my womb, reconnecting to my sacred feminine cycles. And so these teachers helped me come through my own dark night, multiple dark nights, and find my own joy. And now that's what I help women do as well.
That is a lot to digest. So,
Yeah.
right, can you explain? Because I do not want, because this is an international podcast, I do not assume everyone knows exactly what we are talking about. So, can you explain what mushroom muon is? What microdosing is, psychedelics, and how does it work?
Absolutely. Yes. So psychedelics are a sometimes plant, sometimes fungi, sometimes synthetic substance that in a lot of cases creates hallucinations. Recreationally, these are used to get high and to detach from the reality that is our world. However, these are really, in a lot of cultures all around the world, sacred medicines that have been used for millennia to not detach, but to go deeper and to really ascend into, you know, our highest calling. So we've seen mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, on pretty much every continent except Antarctica, and that we know of. And these are guides back into yourself. That's how I see them. They're known as entheogens, into yourself, seeing the God within. And so cultures from, South America, Central America, European, even Asian cultures have substances like mushrooms. They may even have mushrooms, but I know there's some other plants that are psychedelics in those places. So that's, I guess, what is a psychedelic? What is it often doing? How do I see it differently? Now, when it comes to microdosing is when you take such a tiny amount of this substance that you aren't high, you aren't tripping, you aren't intoxicated, you are not drunk, you are not feeling, unable to control your body. And still, at these really tiny doses, you're seeing benefits like better mood, better focus, less pain, more energy, more patience. And the way that I work with people in these little doses is to help them create new patterns, new habits to help with things like negative self talk. The inability to set boundaries is another really good example. And to go deeper into the why am I this way? And I think that's what mushrooms do a really good job of. It certainly was the way with me. Why am I continuing to enact this pattern, even though consciously I don't want to do it? But there has to be a reason why it keeps showing up for me. And so with microdosing, you would eat mushrooms. It's usually mushrooms or LSD, the two substances folks most often microdose. You would eat a tiny amount of mushrooms a couple times a week for a few weeks, and then you take a break. This isn't something that you do all the time. This is something that comes to you in a season of life. And when you meet them with intention, which is how I work with them and encourage others to work with them, they can be really amazing catalysts for your healing. Not magic pills, they don't do the work, but they assist you as you do the deeper work.
Right, so many questions. Because to be honest, plant medicine is like the next thing that I want to do, which is why I was so excited to have you on the show, so I can ask you all the questions for a selfish
Yeah.
reason. But again, it's illegal in the country that I am currently in because I have to travel
Hmm.
to other countries to do the
Right.
ceremony and go for the retreat, right? So, how does it help actually? Are you saying that with microdosing we will achieve a state of mind where we are calm, centered, and that allows us to go even deeper into ourselves to unlock our stuck emotions and all that? Are you saying that is helping us to achieve that state of mind? I mean, that's what I'm understanding at the moment.
Yes, it certainly can. So let's just talk a little bit about how it works in the body, and then we can talk about the more spiritual, mystical aspect. So, fundamentally, when we look at psilocybin, which is the psychoactive ingredient in mushrooms, and so when I speak about this, we're speaking specifically about mushrooms, which is what I work with. Other plant medicines like ayahuasca work differently. And I'm not well versed in that because I don't work with that. So psilocybin, magic mushrooms, they work with our serotonin receptors that are all throughout the body, in the gut, and really densely located in the brain and in a very specific part of the brain, which is called the default mode network. Now, this is where your deep beliefs live, your abstract thinking lives, your sense of self, and also your default mode is the thing that helps you get to work day after day without really having to think about it. Like your ingrained patterns. Yesterday, I gave an example on my Instagram about, I empty the espresso little container into the trash can every day. My husband recently decided he wanted to save those coffee grounds for the garden, and he put a little bucket right next to the coffee maker to signal to Leslie, put coffee grounds in this bucket now. What do I still do? Continue to go to the trash can. That's my ingrained pattern. And that's in my default mode. So it can be silly little things like the habits you continually have, but also deeper things live in the default mode, like our negative self talk, right? these ingrained things that might not be serving us anymore are really stuck in this place of our mind that has become rigid as we've aged. So when we're little, our default mode is wide open. It's why we learn so quickly. But as we get older, it really starts to freeze. It really gets, stuck in these patterns because our brain wants to operate at efficiency mode. And so, if we don't have to continue to think about how to get to work or continue to think about how to make our coffee, that's another reason that it's just kind of there in the default mode. So, where this can be really impacted by psilocybin is that psilocybin helps to thaw the default mode. So, it sort of turns down a little bit, and other parts of our brain turn on. And so, this is important for something known as neuroplasticity, and when we want to change or pattern interrupt things that aren't serving us. And so I gave that silly analogy of the coffee, but let's talk negative self-talk. Let's talk, my past eating disorders or my alcohol abuse. That was in my default mode because that's what I went to when I needed to cope. And so if you've got a coping mechanism that is not serving you and you are sick of it, psilocybin can turn down, soften, and start to thaw out the default mode so that other areas of your brain light up and you can pattern interrupt. And so for me, that looks like, choosing not to drink and then continuing to do the work when I did have a craving to connect the dots and create a new pattern, right? So there is this phenomenon known as rebus, which is relaxed beliefs under psychedelics. And again, this is partly what psychedelics do is help us to naturally question our patterns, naturally question the beliefs we have held on to, and pattern interrupt the things that we no longer want to be doing. So, when it comes to the more mystical side of things, right? I really see magic mushrooms as opening the door to the subconscious because it opens the door to the default mode. And so when we are expanding our mind, we are expanding our brain's capability to connect with other portions of the brain, to fire new neural pathways, to create a new habit. That can help us become more open, to start naturally questioning. And when we add in other things like meditation, for instance, you can really start to see how neuroplasticity, which is just the ability to change your brain, right, to change your mind, can connect in new ways and form new habits and patterns. That's kind of how it works. So, yes, it does have the ability to make you have better mood or more focus or more peace and calm. And that's sort of how it's often doing it. Now, the other thing I'll say before, I let you chime in is sometimes psychedelics, sometimes mushrooms can amplify feelings that don't feel good, right? They are non-specific amplifiers. And so that is why I think having someone to guide you is really important if you want to do deep work. But just know that if you set out and set an intention of having more peace, having more calm, there is a it's like a little joke. I almost want to say 100% chance you're going to get more triggered before you get there, because it's like bringing everything up to the surface for you to look at. You deeply want to be calm. You deeply want to have inner peace. Oh, well, now all my triggers are here and I get the chance to look at what's actually triggering me about this, what's actually making me, get angry versus become calm, and choose a new path, respond to it versus reaction, which is what we often live in, is this reactivity mode.
Right. And how is this different from any other healing modalities? I know you personally have tried a lot, and I personally have tried a lot. Even talk therapy, coaching, meditation, right? Somatic, and there's so many, right? So how is this different from, or does it work together? Because I know you're also a somatic coach, right? So is this just one of the tools that you use to help your clients, or it can work individually as well as a healing modality?
That's a good question. So, what I often say is talk therapy, for instance, which is what I was in for a really long time, is great at helping you identify experiences that you've had, identify maybe your patterns, and talk through the things that have happened to you. But for me, it was always just about talking. There really wasn't any integration or any movement past there. And so for me, I'd sit in sessions with my therapist, and she'd say, "Oh, you're so good at talking about this." And yeah, I was intellectualizing. But being able to say I'm in a trauma response, being able to say I have anxiety doesn't do anything to heal the trauma or the anxiety. And so psilocybin and microdosing can help with those two things in particular, and as well as a lot of other things. Again, because it's helping to change the brain, and I feel that it helps to enact the pause. So this is another big part of somatics, right? Is enacting a pause. So before you jump into the spiral, or you jump into the trigger, or you jump into reactivity, it almost lets you have a little pause to breathe and to zoom out, especially when you're looking at this consciously and with intention, and think, "Oh, okay, this person is triggering me because this is bringing up this and this and this, and now I see, the difference." So I think it helps in a different way than talk therapy, but I love when my folks go to therapy first. They know, they've dug up their past, they're like, "Oh, I have this and this and this." And mushrooms can really be helpful to help go from intellectualizing your trauma into actually integrating it. And I think somatics are very similar. So how I pair the two is I help people travel back into the body, usually through microdose assisted visual journeys, meditation style sessions, where we ask the body, what sensations are you feeling? What memories, emotions, or thoughts are coming up around the sensation? Is there a story behind that? And time after time, it'll link to something in childhood, or it'll link to something that they have said over and over to themselves. I'm not worth that promotion. I am not worthy of love. I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. Those things live in the body as stuck emotions, as trauma, right? And we know that thanks to lots of amazing studies. There's lots of books out about that. But I think that allowing psilocybin to open and soften the part of your brain where your rigid self-talk lives, and then venturing into the body to ask it, what is really here? What am I really experiencing? And then letting what comes up come up, and using things like breath work or meditation, journaling as well, to sort of process what you have seen and felt. I think that's what makes this such a potent modality, and what makes it different than some of the other mainstream things like talk therapy, for instance.
Yeah, so let's go back to your story for a while to help me and my listeners understand the experience a little bit more deeply. You mentioned that you've been through trauma, addiction, right? All of that, mental health challenges. So when you discovered plant medicine, psychedelics, what was your experience? What was your first encounter? How was it for you? Like, what was your experience, and how did it eventually help you heal from your trauma, that the shame trauma that you carry for so long? If you can guide us through the journey of how it happened, the transformation, your transformation, that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually never even tried psychedelics until I was in my 30s. I didn't have the experimental phase in college that a lot of kids do. And I was really scared of psychedelics. I really thought that these were bad, that they were going to make me lose control. And as a perfectionist with an eating disorder, I lived for control. So I was like, I'm not having anything to do with this, until I was in my early 30s, and I heard a woman on a podcast, which is why I love talking about this on podcasts, speaking about how psilocybin had been able to help a lot of her clients with their sexual trauma and their sexual shame. So I immediately had her onto my show. And the second we hung up the call, I hired her, because I knew if I was going to explore something that I had so much bias around, I did not want to DIY this, didn't feel safe to DIY it. And so I knew I needed a guide. And so I worked with Bijou for several months. And my intention was to become open to receiving pleasure. Now, mushrooms give you what you need, not always what you ask for. And so what they heard me say is, you have to become open to receiving anything. We're going to give you pleasure as icing on the cake, honey, but you cannot get that shit first. So I had to spend lots of moments deeply releasing. Now, the first few times that I ate my microdose, I didn't really feel a lot. And that's by design. You're not supposed to feel high. You're not supposed to feel intoxicated while you're ingesting microdoses. And still, even though I didn't necessarily feel anything physically changing, when I went into these deep meditations with Bijou and we were able to start putting together the pieces, that's when I unlocked that wound of unworthiness. I wasn't conscious about that. I wasn't conscious of the fact that this deep wound I had had since before I was born was making so many things in my life show up: crappy relationships, not asking for what I needed at work, over giving. And then it was just made amplified, this wound, when I had herpes diagnosed. So the first few times didn't feel like a lot physically, but in my mind, in my emotions, it was like have you ever seen the movie The Hunger Games?
I love it.
Okay, when they're in the arena and there's all the folks above in the game makers suite, what I would start to see is myself zoom out from my life, looking down at myself and putting together all of the little pieces, all of the dots to say, okay, this is why you can't speak up at work. This is why you feel like you have to say yes, even when you say you want to say no. This is where you had those bad relationships for your entire 20s, right? And so that's what it felt like for me on microdosing pretty quickly. Now, I worked with her for about 4 months total, on and off. And it disrupted my life in the very best of ways. It showed me that I was no longer meant to be a news anchor, that this was killing me in a lot of ways. You know, I was at the peak of my anxiety. I was diagnosed with PTSD at this point from my television career because of the things I had seen. And I had to let go of that job. And letting go of that six-figure job was hard as hell. And so it wasn't comfortable. It was the most uncomfortable I think I had been in a really long time, but I felt supported the entire way. And I think that, yes, it was because I had the guide, but it was because I trusted the medicine. I trusted that this was something bigger than myself. I trusted these as the sacred and ancient teachers that I believe them to be, and that cultures all across the world have seen them to be for years and years, decades and decades, millennia. And I just said to myself, okay, you know what? I'm going to give this to something bigger than me and allow this trust, this utter devotion to see me through. And it did. So that's kind of what it was like in the beginning. It was messy, it was dark, and I am happy to say that at least about 16 months later, I had this aha. And again, I was not microdosing for 16 months. I microdosed for about 4 months, took a big break, and then came back to it for a couple of months. But about 16 months after I hired that coach, I'm on a walk and I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, my life is so full of pleasure. I'm having more orgasms than I've ever had. And again, so I got what I asked for eventually, but it was messy to get there.
Is it possible to form an addiction with magic mushrooms? And how can we not no we how can someone differentiate between using psychedelics for deep healing purposes versus as a means of avoidance and escape from reality?
Oh, such a great question. So, physically, mushrooms are not addictive, right? So, there's nothing in the mushroom that's going to make you want it, like sugar, right? Or alcohol. However, when we start to see changes in our life, when we start to feel better, we as humans naturally think, oh, well, I'm only feeling better because of this new thing, which is in our situation that we're talking about, mushrooms. So we can form what's called a psychological dependence on the medicine. And that's why I say, you know, you don't microdose daily, you don't microdose forever. You're taking a little chunk of your time, your life, devoting it to this, and then you're taking a break. And so when we are talking about a microdosing protocol, which is a huge term within this field, a protocol, it could look like 3 days a week you eat mushrooms. You eat mushrooms for 8 weeks total, and then you take 8 weeks off. And in the off time, you watch for all of the amazing new changes, new patterns, and the continued ability to feel good, because you've got this afterglow effect, which is, you know, a well-known documented thing around psychedelics, where you still are feeling good, even though you haven't ingested any substance. And so that's what I tell people to look for. If you get to this space where you're like, oh, I'm just feeling good because I'm eating mushrooms, no, you have to look at what's happening on the days you don't for proof that it's working even when you are not ingesting it. Now, for the second part of the question, how do we know it's helping versus becoming a new escape. Oof. I see this a lot, actually. I see it a lot with folks who go to big medicine journeys. So with microdosing, I don't think it's as prevalent for escapism. I think it's more prevalent for psychological dependency when it comes to a microdose, right? Like, because you're taking such a little amount and you feel good when you do it, you think you should do that every day. That is something that I could see happening on a microdose, which is why we make sure we take breaks. On the big dose level, right? So this is at the level where you're tripping, where you're out of body, where you're hallucinating, where your senses are just like jacked up on steroids, right? Which can feel really amazing, can also be kind of terrifying.
Mm.
Those types of experiences can be the ones where you're having major mystical ahas, where you're seeing God. I have sat at the feet of the goddess, like the primordial lizard woman, and it was wild. And so people who use this as an escape, I often see them going to ceremony after ceremony. They may also be doing lots of different plant medicines, maybe mushrooms here, maybe combo here, maybe bufo, maybe ayahuasca, right? So that's what I always look for when I'm working with people. How much have you sat with medicine? Are you wanting the experience of being in the medicine, but not the experience of integrating what comes after, which can be, with that dopamine crash, it can feel real bad, right? But that's where you have to hang on. And so, yeah, it can be both, right? I don't think that physically we get addicted, but our brains are so smart and our brains are so interested in, this different feeling that, yeah, you can use it to escape. You can use it to cope if you're not using it with intention. And if you're not going about it in a way that if you're not going about it with a desire to deeply change and to heal. But yeah, I see even big time gurus, quote unquote, doing some shady things. So yeah, to answer the question, yes, you can become psychologically dependent. You absolutely can use this as an escape. And if you have an addictive personality or addictive background, right, which I certainly do, I think that's why it's even more important to have someone to be like your accountability person. But I also know that if you are entering into this with integrity and with intention, I think the mushrooms will support you and I think they will help you through that and they won't let you become.
Mm.
Because there's other things that can happen too if you want to know. So I've had people who become really sick after eating them for a while. They'll become so sensitive they can barely even have like the teensiest of dose. And I'm like, okay, maybe it's not. Maybe you need to take a break. Maybe, and then like it'll come out that they've been to like 3 ceremonies in the past 6 months and they've also been microdosing. I'm like, yeah, okay, I think maybe this is the mushroom saying it ain't it. You need to take a pause. So I trust them to tell me what's happening. And if you can trust them too, I think that you don't have to worry about psychological dependence or using it as a coping or escape mechanism.
So how do we know? Since you mentioned that a lot of people have just been, trying around, and I know I'm someone who has a tendency of trying all the things, all the new things. So how do we know? After talking to you, like how do we know which retreat is suitable, is best for us, ceremony to go to, which plant medicine is good for us if we want to start this journey?
So I'll start with, how do you know what medicine is right for you? I think if you are hearing about a certain medicine over and over again, and not just on your socials, because once you like something, your algorithm's always going to show it to you again. But, I think mushrooms have their own like universal algorithm. If you are hearing your friend talk about it, if you're seeing a picture of a mushroom, if you notice mushrooms more, if you're seeing a book on a bookshelf as you pass by the bookstore and it's like How to Change Your Mind or whatever, right? Which is a book by Michael Pollan. I think that little whispers happen that can guide you to this medicine. It certainly is what happened for me. Um, so I think that's one thing, right? Start paying attention to all the little signs that might be pointing you toward a certain medicine. And then begin to do your deep research. You're going to want to, for instance, mushrooms, watch documentaries about mushrooms, read books about psychedelic mushrooms. And when it comes to finding the retreats that are that are the best for you, this is what I would say. You want to look to see if the retreat is going to give you prep and ongoing integration. The biggest messed up thing I see in the retreat space is a lack of integration long term. Yeah, one integration circle 1 month later is not enough. You want to look at this a couple of times. So, are they offering integration? The second thing, can you find people who have actually gone to that retreat and talk to them? Because the retreat's only going to share the best, they're not going to share the worst. There is just such a massive tourism industry right now around plant medicine that I'm actually very hesitant to point people toward any retreats. So again, that's what I would say. Look to see what the other thing is. What experience do you want? Do you want it to be very primal? Do you want it to be steeped in ancestral tradition? Do you want it to be more in a modern retreat space? Do you want it to be bougie? Do you want to live in a hut? So like there are all these little things too that you can look at. But I would say find someone, multiple someones who have been to the retreat. If that retreat will not help you find them, look at like the retreat's website, or hopefully they have a social media. You also want to ask, as far as like your facilitator, is it going to be a male? Is it going to be a female? I think women should be working with women, point blank, period. Always. It's too shady. There's a lot of darkness. I'm being dead serious, right? Like there's a lot of darkness out there. And yes, women can do harm to other women. And there's not nearly as many situations being reported. And then I also would say, before you even eat anything, before you eat mushrooms or you drink ayahuasca or you do anything, you can start to be in integrity and in reciprocity with the medicine by simply asking it to come into your life. I do this work with folks and say, you know what? Find find a mushroom or go into the forest, or and just meditate or pray or whatever it is that you feel called to. Ask that spirit energy to be in your life, right? Working with the spirit of the medicine, and let it show you what it is that you should be doing, right?
Mm.
A lot of times I do that with giving back to the community or cleaning up the park, or, helping others in whatever way I can. But that's another way, right? To just begin to dip your toe into what this can look like.
So you mentioned ongoing integration is important after the retreat, after the first dose. So what are some of your daily practices that you personally swear by to stay connected to the transformation, to your body, to your intuition, to your authenticity? What are some of your daily practices and habits?
For integration, yeah. So my main practice is for integration of all the things. It's something that I developed last summer called the shift method. And so I spent over a year ingesting no medicine. And last year, about middle of the way through, I experienced the loss of my soulmate dog. And so I was in a deep state of grief, a very active place where I would not recommend anyone who is in an active state of things like grief, panic, anxiety, depression to ever choose to use microdoses or full doses, because, like we spoke about, it can amplify those feelings and make you feel worse. Okay. So that's where I am. I'm like, oh my gosh, I know I'm not going to ingest any medicine, but I need something to continue to integrate this grief, to integrate this pain and this sadness. And so I developed this shift method, which is a 9-minute embodiment practice. It's 2 minutes of bullet point style journaling, 3 minutes of breath work where you're only trying to extend the exhale. So you're going to inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth for longer than you inhaled. And if you want to throw some icing on the cake, make a sound when you exhale, like a moan or a growl or a om or hum. And that's going to deeply help to stimulate the vagus nerve and help to settle your body and help you come back into a state of safety in your parasympathetic nervous system. And then finally, it's 4 minutes of intuitive movement. So maybe that's dancing, but more often it's a little bit of a shake or a sway of the body. Maybe it's laying on the floor with your feet flat on the ground and your knees up with your pelvis just rocking forward and back. Maybe it's laying on your side and then shifting to the other side, going from fetal position to fetal position, and letting the body lead the way. So within the shift method, shift stands for seek out your sensations, honor what comes up, inhale, flow, and then take stock. So what is it that I'm feeling? Yeah. What is it I'm feeling? I honor this and I'm going to breathe through it. And that's when that flow, when you let your body show you, it'll show you what you need. If you're angry, It'll usually result in you making super loud noises on the breath and shaking that body on the intuitive flow. And then afterwards, you pause, you take stock and think, okay, what do I need now? Do I need more? Do I need to do it again? Do I need to go for a walk? And so that's the big integration that I continue to use is it's a way to ask the body what it needs and use your logical mind to put voice to what the body is expressing. And I think that's an excellent tool for ongoing psychedelic integration as well. I use it with all of my clients because it just gives you that 9-minute pause to be in the body, to let what's coming to the surface have its moment so that the feelings and the emotions that you have, grief for me was that big one, don't get bottled inside, don't get stuck inside. And so the shift method helped me not go back to alcohol last year because I've been sober for about 2.5 years at this point, and the only time I actually felt like I could get a drink right now is when I had to take that dog to the vet. Coming back from the vet, I was like, oh my gosh, there is a part of me that deeply wants to get blackout drunk and not feel these feelings. And I told my husband who was driving, I'm like, and that is like a not even a 1% of me, but it's there. Right. So it's like I was able to acknowledge that, and shifting let me feel the feelings versus how I would in the past just decide to drown them away. So I like that as an integration. And then I think the other thing is just speaking to people who are in the same place as you, right? Like I think integration circles, which happen all over the world, are really important. You can find them usually by searching to see if your place that you live has a psychedelic society or a plant medicine integration circle. There are tons online. I have a membership as well where we do this twice a month. And I think that's also important because being with other people and their shared experience can highlight things for your own and give you ahas, and same the other way around, right? Like your experience can help someone else as well. And I think that especially women being in conversation around this can be really influential and very healing because society has taken us away from each other and has done such an assault on female relationships. So that's the two things that I would suggest.
Yeah. And you only work with women, right? And you have a unique way of working with women. You are also a menstrual cycle educator. And you said that this is the way to unlock deeper purpose and creativity. So how does aligning with our cycle impact how we show up in the world?
I love this question. So I think that the menstrual cycle impacts every element of your life if you let it. Can be in a bad way and can be in a really good way, right? And so unfortunately, none of us, well, I can't say none. There are beautiful unicorns out there who learn from their infancy that this is something to be honored, right? And God, I envy those folks. But, most of us are not told to honor the phases of our cycle. A lot of people I talk to don't even know that there are 4 phases of your cycle. And so if you're listening and you've never heard this before, your menstrual cycle is not just the days you bleed. It is the first day you bleed all the way until the day before your next bleed. And so usually that's 26 to 35 days, depending on who you are and your unique cycle. But within that month-ish period, there are 4 different phases marked by different hormones, different energy levels, different capacities to think straight, right? Different changes in metabolism, strength, libido, all of those things. The 4 phases are your inner spring, inner summer, inner fall, and inner winter, also known as the follicular, ovulatory, luteal, and menstrual phase. And I like to talk about them as seasons because a lot of us get that, right? What does spring feel like? Newness, new beginnings, energy rising. Summer, peak energy, peak magnetism, social, hot, figuratively and literally. And fall is the time of going inward, of harvesting, of getting ready, of preparation, of looking at details, right? And then finally, winter is more for inward solitude, of hibernation, of letting the ground, the earth, the body be, quiet so that we can be rejuvenated again at spring. And so if you learn to let your cycle help you plan your life, help you see your life in a new way, I really think it can become an amazing tool and partner in a woman's journey to her highest and best self. For me, menstrual cycle work is what I did first. I had my awakening in 2018, 2019. Quit the pill in 2020 because every time I'd meditate and I'd learn about the feminine archetypes, or I would look into things like goddess worship around, all of the cultures. And I was so fascinated by that as a preacher's daughter who grew up with deep religious programming. I was so fascinated by goddesses and all the different pantheons all around the globe. And every time I would sit with these archetypes and I would meditate on this, I'd hear this little whisper: you've got to get off birth control. You're stifling your female energy. You're never going to know what it's fully like to be fully expressed unless you quit synthetic hormones. And now I was blessed to be in a relationship where my husband went and got a vasectomy. And so I didn't have to worry about birth control anymore. And that is what really led me into this deep knowing of what it is like to be cyclical. And so that's why I say, this can be such an influential and important tool. When it comes to psychedelics and the menstrual cycle, I have seen these just open pathways into the womb, right? Like I vision into my womb on the regular. I help my clients meditate on the womb space. We often use like motifs of a cave or the great tree or something like that, and vision into those spaces within the body to see what's held there. And oftentimes what I'm noticing is there's shame, negative body image, lots of trauma, maybe trauma you don't even know about. So maybe it's not even yours. And that's why I say I had trauma from before I was born, because I have a really like unique birth story that I'm adopted. Um, and so that's sort of why I think the menstrual cycle is so impactful and potent. And then I think there are many other deeper things that you could work on that I usually suggest for one-on-one client work, or at least more deep exploration. But you can look at internal vaginal massage. That was really helpful for me. You can look at things like sex magic. You can look at things like visioning, like you said, asking the body what it is that is stored there. We already know that the hips store a lot of pain, trauma. If you've ever been to a yoga class and you found yourself crying, I can't be the only one. When you're really in those hip openers or those heart openers, you suddenly feel those floods of emotion. Same with if you've ever been in a massage and felt anger, or you felt crying coming up there. Those are all ways that your body is telling you that there's something in there that might want to be seen. And I think that womb work is so impactful for women because this is the seat of our power. This is literal life force energy. Whether you choose to have a baby or not, your womb, and through the menstrual cycle of birth and death, which is very psychedelic, right? Every single month, you have the chance to become someone brand new. And so when you're learning and listening to the womb in that aspect, you can birth business projects, you can birth, new relationships, you can birth children, yes, of course. And I think you can birth your truest self by letting this power become activated and become cleansed and vibrant and excited through aligning with the cycle, noticing what it is happening within your body through each of those phases. And yeah, then doing some of the things that we mentioned, putting the hands on the womb, noticing that if I ask you to put your hands on your belly right now, how do you feel about that? You got a little shame around your lower belly? A lot of us do. So it's like just noticing what comes up with those different elements of the body, and that womb itself, I think can be really healing for women in a lot of different ways.
And it's not just, I mean, it's also where we have pressure, right? So how does connecting to pressure heal our trauma?
So when we talk about what is necessary, right? It's when we talk about what's necessary for healing trauma and what's necessary for feeling pleasure, the common denominator is feeling safe. And so I think that pleasure heals trauma because if you feel safe enough to feel pleasure, you can feel safe enough to move through your trauma. And so through somatic practices like slow breath work, like intuitive movement, like doing the shift method, you start to show your body it's safe to feel these things. It's safe to look deeply within myself. And so then, pleasure, I think, has a lot of connotations where pleasure equals sex. I do not think that. Pleasure for me does not equal sex. Pleasure does not equal orgasms. Pleasure equals feeling more in every aspect of your life and allowing every aspect of your life to feel good.
Mm.
So, can you wake up in the morning and like be so obsessed with the cup of coffee that you chose to have or whatever like first drink you have that you can just feel the taste, you feel the sensation of like the creaminess. I have an excellent coffee every morning, so I know exactly what I'm talking about right now. So like letting the senses come alive, right? Can you go on the morning walk and take time to pause and think, "Oh my goddess, like my legs are doing so much amazing work right now and I don't even get it. The sun on my face feels so good. Watching my puppy frolic. Wow, that's so funny. She's so cute, right? So allowing everything in your life to start to be this expression of pleasure allows you to live more and more and more in a state of safety because you're pausing. You're not in this activation state of fight, flight, freeze. You're not in this state of fear or a state of anger, right? Because you're noticing. You're noticing all the little glimmers, all the little amazing things about your life. And then from there, you could start to actually include some things that are more sexual, more orgasmic. But I think that living every moment of your life by pausing to look for pleasure helps the nervous system become more regulated, more resilient, more in the safety zone, so that over time, your body knows it's safe to feel these things. And so, sure, I can look at some things that don't feel that good. I can look at some things that feel scary or angering, and I know I can come back to this place of pleasure. I can come back to this place of safety at any moment because I know how to pause and notice what's all around me. And that's what I mean when I say that I think pleasure can heal trauma. And there's a much deeper aspect of it when it comes to the work that I do with people, but that's where I start noticing all the little things in your life. If you want to live with more pleasure, name like 5 things right now that make you so freaking excited. Like that's already happened today. Your exceptional life. Your life is exceptional. Like what cool things, what cool shit did you see today? And think of that as like your pleasure practice.
Yeah, I mean, one of my things is speaking with you today. I'm really excited, and this is really my joy. And thank you so much for this, conversation. Thank you so much for your time, sharing so generously with me and my listeners today. Now, before we end, is there anything else that you really want to talk about? Perhaps I didn't ask you or didn't let you.
I do think that, and I know I've said this, I don't think you necessarily have to eat psychedelics, eat mushrooms to heal your life. Because of where you live, where it's illegal, where I live, it's illegal. We have to go places for it to be legal a lot of times. You don't have to. If you you don't have to do that in order to heal. There's no one path for your healing. There's just your path. And so you get to decide, thanks to the amazingness of the internet, all the different things that you want to try. And if you just start to look at your life as an excellent exercise and pleasure, that's one way you'll start to heal. If you can just start to look at everything as something happening for you and not to you, you will start to heal. If you can just change that one little piece of the puzzle, maybe one day you eat plant medicine, maybe one day you don't. But those things are things you can do right this moment. While you're listening to us, like think about the things that you saw today that were awesome, right? Like I just want to hear about that. That for me is just so exciting. That's so full of pleasure for me to hear what excites other people. Like I love folks when they're excited. And so I guess that's just what I would say to leave this conversation. Yeah, we talked a lot about this next level catalyst, which is psychedelic medicine. And yet you have the medicine that you need within you right now if you choose to look at it and you choose to think about your life in a little bit of a different way. And I'm not saying that life won't be hard and that things won't be messy and that it's always going to be easy to think of things as happening for you and not to you. But if you can just afterwards, after you have the meltdown, after you lose your shit on someone, think about, okay, how was this for me? How am I not a victim, but I'm someone who's actively choosing this? Maybe you're going to just get a little bit more curious. And that I think can be really healing too.
Yeah, that is so powerful. Thank you so much for that. Now, before we end, we still have 5 more questions, and these are our rapid fire questions. And every question has to be answered in one word or one sentence maximum.
Okay.
The first question is, what is one thing you wish you knew earlier?
That my womb was going to lead me home.
Interesting. Second question, if you could relive one day of your life, which day would it be?
Getting the herpes diagnosis.
Hmm. If you could master one skill you don't currently have, what would it be?
Time travel.
I love that. Me too. If you could instantly solve one world problem, what would it be?
The lack of empathy for other people that this world is
Hmm.
lacking.
With that. The last question is, what brings you the greatest joy?
Connection and conversations like this.
Yep. Yeah, by the way, Leslie, she's also a podcaster, so go check out her podcast. So now tell my people where they can find you, where they can follow you, if they want to work with you, where should they go?
Well, the podcast is a great place to start. You can look for The Light Within wherever you listen to this podcast. She'll be there too. And, if you're interested in exploring the shift method, which is something that I think everyone can benefit from, I have a free guide. I'd love to give you a link for the show notes so folks can head down there and grab that. It's a wonderful entryway into my ecosystem. There are notes on mushrooms in that. There are certain links that you may want to find. The answers to your top questions are going to be in those guides. And if you're on Instagram, you can find me at Leslie Draffin. But getting the shift method will put you on my email list, which is where all the true magic lives. The uncensored, algorithm-free magic. So that's what I would suggest. The podcast, grab the shift method, Instagram, and let's talk on emails.
Awesome. Now, guys, I know you love this episode because you are listening to the right end, and I hope this episode has been, as Leslie says, has been a pleasure for you to listen and share this with your friend, your family. Take us on your IG story if you want to post them and tell us what is your biggest takeaway from this episode. If you have any other question, you can always leave a comment below, and I'll leave all her links in the show note below. So make sure you check it out and download the free guide. And I will always leave you the same way as I leave you with every other episode. Show up. The one is you, and you need you. Thanks for listening, and I wish you all a joyful and amazing day ahead. Thank you again for tuning into Find Joy Joyan podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, take a screenshot and share it on your IG story and tag Find Joy Joyan _podcast so I know you are listening. And leave us a positive review on Apple Podcasts if you haven't already done so. And remember to hit the subscribe button whether you are listening on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, or any of your other favorite platforms. If you love what we are doing and want to become one of our sponsors, you can send me a DM to connect. And thanks for being here. I will see you soon in the next episode.